Lose the attitude or lose your $500,000 bonus, the VP texted at 1:58 p.m. I replied with a single word, copy. Little did he know what I had planned. 14 hours later, at 8:01 a.m., my phone lit up with panicked messages. The dashboard that powered our entire company operation now displayed 3 simple words: access denied. From the conference room, I heard a crash as our legal counsel stood up so quickly his chair fell backward. His voice cracked as he asked the question that would change everything. Please tell me she didn't own the scheduler, but I did. And after years of having my work claimed by others while being told I wasn't valuable, I was about to show them exactly what I was worth. I never set out to become a multi-millionaire software developer. My journey started 6 years ago when I joined FinSync Solutions as a junior programmer with a computer science degree and boundless enthusiasm. I'm Tessa Morgan, 32 years old, with a reputation for solving problems that others deemed impossible. At least, that was my reputation until recently. When I first joined the company, we were still a scrappy startup trying to break into the financial technology sector. Our main product was a trading platform that allowed banks to execute complex transactions quickly. But it suffered from one major flaw: the scheduling system was a nightmare. Transactions would process out of sequence, critical operations would get stuck in limbo, and our early clients were threatening to walk away. I don't care how you fix it, just make it work, my first boss, Jack Turner, told me during my second week. Jack was one of the good ones, a straight-talking engineering director who recognized talent and rewarded results. Everyone else has tried and failed. Show me what you can do. I spent the next 3 weeks barely leaving the office, surviving on vending machine snacks and short naps under my desk. What I discovered was that the entire architecture needed to be reimagined. The existing system treated each transaction as an isolated event, but financial operations don't work that way. They're interconnected, with complex dependencies and timing requirements. So I built something new. I called it the Advanced Dependency Resolution Scheduler, ADRS for short, though everyone just called it the scheduler. It wasn't just a patch. It was a complete paradigm shift in how our platform managed operations. It could analyze thousands of pending transactions, determine optimal execution pathways, resolve conflicts, and adapt in real time as conditions changed. This is remarkable, Jack said when I demonstrated the first version. I've never seen anything like it. Within 6 months of implementing the scheduler, our client retention jumped to 98%. Within a year, we'd tripled our client base. The scheduler became the heart of our entire operation, the secret sauce that set us apart from competitors. My life at FinSync was good during those early years. I built a small but mighty team of 4 developers who helped me refine and expand the scheduler's capabilities. There was Darren, a database wizard who could optimize queries like nobody's business. Alexa, who had an uncanny ability to predict edge cases before they became problems. Marcus, fresh out of MIT with algorithmic insights that continually pushed our system further, and Harper, our front-end specialist, who made the impossibly complex seem intuitive to users. We worked well together, combining our strengths to continually improve the system. I was promoted to senior developer, then engineering manager, and finally director of core systems. My salary grew, bonuses became substantial, and I felt valued. Jack made sure I received proper credit for my innovations, and I even began speaking at industry conferences about the architectural principles behind our success. Then everything changed when FinSync was acquired by Atlantic Financial Group, a behemoth in the industry, with 50 times our size and a corporate culture that couldn't have been more different from our collaborative environment. Jack was replaced by a parade of rotating executives who barely understood our technology. My direct reports grew from 5 to 25 overnight as departments were reorganized. And most significantly, Gregory Harmon was installed as the new Executive Vice President of Technology. Gregory was everything. Jack wasn't political, territorial, and focused more on appearance than substance. In his mid-40s with perfectly tailored suits and an MBA from a prestigious university, he had a resume filled with short stints at major companies where he claimed responsibility for transformational projects. He spoke in buzzwords and viewed technology as a means to advance his career rather than a craft to be perfected. Our first one-on-one meeting set the tone for our relationship. "I've reviewed your department's contribution," he said, leaning back in his chair in his newly decorated corner office. "The scheduler seems functional, but decidedly elementary in its approach." I blinked in surprise. The scheduler was anything but elementary. It contained proprietary algorithms that had revolutionized transaction processing in our sector. "Actually, it's quite sophisticated," I responded, launching into an explanation of the mathematics behind our dependency resolution system. Gregory cut me off mid-sentence. Yes. What I'm more interested in is how we scale it to enterprise level. Atlantic Financial processes 10 times the volume you're used to handling. We've already begun that work, I said, trying to hide my irritation. My team has been implementing distributed processing nodes that can— Great, he interrupted again. I want to be completely hands-on with this. Copy me on all communications, and we'll schedule weekly architecture reviews where you can bring me up to speed. That was the first red flag. The second came 2 weeks later when I discovered Gregory had scheduled a presentation to the Atlantic Financial executive team about his vision for next-generation transaction processing using slides my team had created, with our names removed. When I confronted him privately about it, his response chilled me. "Tessa, you need to understand how things work at this level. Individual credit isn't how executives operate. We present as one voice, my voice, to leadership. Your bonus structure reflects your contribution, so there's no need to concern yourself with who presents what." I walked away from that conversation, unsettled, but told myself to focus on the work. The acquisition meant new resources, bigger challenges, and yes, significantly larger bonuses. My team was now working on expanding the scheduler to handle Atlantic's entire global operation, a challenge I found intellectually stimulating despite the frustrating politics. Then came the twist that should have warned me of what was to come. Gregory hired Warren Phillips, a 29-year-old former colleague from his previous company, as Strategic Innovation Director, a nebulous role that seemed created specifically for him. Warren had no background in financial technology, but carried himself with the unearned confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences for failure. "Warren will be overseeing the scheduler expansion project," Gregory announced during our department meeting. "His fresh perspective will help us break free from conventional thinking." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. The scheduler was my creation, my responsibility, and now suddenly this outsider with zero relevant experience was being placed above me? The confused glances from my team told me they felt the same way. After the meeting, Alexa stopped by my office. "What does this mean for us?" she asked, concerned. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "But let's give him a chance. Maybe he does have valuable insights from outside our industry." I was trying to be fair, to be professional. But deep down, I already knew something was very wrong at Atlantic Financial. I just didn't realize yet how personal it would become, or that within months, I would be facing a choice between surrendering my life's work or fighting back in a way that would change everything. Warren's impact on our team was immediate and destructive. Within his first week, he rescheduled all our standing meetings, insisted on approving every code commit before it went to testing, and required daily status reports that duplicated information already available in our project management system. "This is how high-performing teams operate," he explained when I questioned the redundancy. "Gregory wants visibility into every aspect of development." What struck me immediately was how little Warren seemed to understand about the scheduler itself. During architectural discussions, he would nod along with technical explanations before offering vague directives like, "Make it more scalable," or "Let's optimize that further," without any specific insights on how to accomplish those goals. Despite this, he began inserting himself between my team and other departments. When the trading platform team needed changes to the scheduler API, they now had to go through Warren instead of coming directly to us. This created bottlenecks and miscommunications that slowed our progress significantly. I don't get it, Darren said during an after-work gathering at a nearby restaurant. The guy literally asked me yesterday what a dependency graph was. How is he qualified to lead this project? He's not, Marcus replied bluntly. But he's Gregory's guy, so here we are. I tried to shield my team as much as possible, taking on the brunt of Warren's micromanagement myself. But the situation grew worse when Warren began taking credit for our collective work in reports to upper management. One particular incident stood out. My team had spent weeks developing a breakthrough in how the scheduler handled cross-currency transactions across different time zones, a complex problem that had previously required manual intervention. Marcus had developed an elegant mathematical model that Alexa then implemented with remarkable efficiency. When we finally solved it, reducing processing time by 72%, I was genuinely proud of what we'd accomplished together. The next day, I received a company-wide email from Gregory. Congratulations to Warren Phillips and the scheduler support team for their innovative solution to our cross-currency transaction challenges. Warren's leadership on this critical initiative exemplifies the forward-thinking approach we're building at Atlantic Financial. Support team. That's what we'd been reduced to, supporting Warren's supposed vision. I printed the email and sat at my desk, staring at it in disbelief. 6 years of building this system from nothing, and now I was merely support. That evening, I did something I should have done months earlier. I pulled out the original employment contracts and intellectual property agreements from when I first developed the scheduler at FinSync. The acquisition had been rushed, and I wondered if something had been overlooked. What I found surprised even me. While FinSync had standard IP clauses for work created by employees, there was a specific carve-out for independent technical innovations developed outside normal business functions. The scheduler had begun as exactly that, a complete redesign rather than an improvement to existing systems, created mostly during nights and weekends when I was technically off the clock. More importantly, I had never signed Atlantic Financial's updated IP agreement. During the acquisition chaos, HR had sent the document to all transferred employees. But I'd been so busy migrating systems that I'd filed it away to handle later. Somehow, it had never been followed up on. I made a phone call to my college friend Natalie, who had become a technology-focused intellectual property attorney. Based on what you're describing, she said after I explained the situation, you might have a legitimate claim to ownership of the core scheduler system. The derivative works and improvements made during normal business hours would belong to the company, but the foundational architecture and algorithms could be yours. What does that mean practically? I asked. It means you should be careful, she warned. Companies don't react well when key employees assert ownership of critical systems, but it also means you have leverage if you choose to use it. I thanked her and promised to send the relevant documents for her to review more thoroughly. That night, I barely slept, contemplating the implications of what I'd discovered. The next few weeks brought escalating tensions. Warren began excluding me from meetings about the scheduler's future development. When I raised concerns about architectural decisions being made without proper technical understanding, I was told I was being resistant to change and too protective of legacy approaches. The final straw came during a critical client implementation. Atlantic Financial was in the final stages of onboarding First National Bank, a client whose transaction volume would increase our system load by nearly 40%. The integration had been challenging, but my team had worked tirelessly to ensure the scheduler could handle the increased demand. 2 days before the go-live date, Warren made an unauthorized change to the scheduler's configuration parameters against my explicit warning that such changes needed extensive testing first. The result was catastrophic. The scheduler crashed during the final integration test, with the client's CTO observing. It took 17 hours of emergency work to identify and fix the problem Warren had created. I documented the incident thoroughly and requested an emergency meeting with Gregory. To my surprise, he agreed to see me immediately. This can't continue, I said, placing the incident report on his desk. Warren made changes he didn't understand to a system that's mission critical for our entire operation. He overrode my technical direction, and it nearly cost us a multi-million-dollar client. I expected Gregory to be concerned, perhaps even grateful for the save. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and studied me with cool detachment. Tessa, I think the real issue here is your inability to collaborate effectively with new leadership. I stared at him in disbelief. Collaboration? Warren changed production parameters without testing or approval. That's not collaboration. It's recklessness. Gregory's expression hardened. Warren was brought in specifically to modernize our approach. Your resistance to his leadership is becoming problematic. This isn't about resistance, I insisted. This is about protecting a critical system that I built from the ground up. The moment the words left my mouth, I knew I'd made a tactical error. Gregory's eyes narrowed. That you built? He repeated. The scheduler is Atlantic Financial Property, developed by our engineering department, which I lead. Perhaps this sense of personal ownership is clouding your professional judgment. The conversation deteriorated from there. By the time I left Gregory's office, it was clear that facts and technical reality were irrelevant. This was about power and control, and in that arena, Gregory had the upper hand, or so he thought. What he didn't know was that I had already sent all the relevant documents to Natalie, who confirmed my suspicion. Legally speaking, I had a strong claim to the core intellectual property behind the scheduler. The question now was what to do with that information. The answer came sooner than expected. The following week, I accidentally received an email clearly not intended for me, a discussion between Gregory and the head of human resources about a leadership transition plan for the core systems team. My name was listed under outgoing personnel, with a target date just after the completion of the First National Bank integration. Warren, unsurprisingly, was named as my replacement. They were planning to fire me as soon as the major client implementation was complete, once they no longer needed my expertise to fix problems they couldn't understand. The final line of the email mentioned standard severance, but notably absent was any reference to my annual bonus, which was due to be paid the following month, $500,000 that I had earned through years of exceptional performance. The revelation left me shaking with anger and betrayal. 6 years of innovation, of solving impossible problems, of building the very foundation their business now relied upon, and this was how they repaid loyalty. That night, I made my decision. I would not go quietly. I would not surrender the fruits of my labor to those who neither understood nor valued it. Atlantic Financial was about to learn a very expensive lesson about the true value of the scheduler and the woman who created it. The next morning, I maintained a facade of normalcy while setting my plan in motion. I contacted Natalie again and retained her services officially, transferring a significant portion of my savings as a retainer. "Are you sure about this?" she asked during our call. "Once we assert your IP rights formally, there's no going back. Your employment will almost certainly be terminated." "They're already planning to fire me," I replied. "At least this way, I'll be compensated fairly for what I've built." Natalie's law firm began preparing the necessary documentation to establish my ownership claim over the core scheduler technology. Meanwhile, I discreetly backed up all relevant development history, original design documents, and personal notes that would support my case that the foundational innovation had occurred outside my normal job functions at FinSync. I also took another precautionary step. While Atlantic Financial used the scheduler throughout their systems, the actual administration interface, the dashboard that controlled configuration, access, and licensing had been my personal project from the beginning. It ran on a separate server cluster that few people in the company even knew existed. I implemented a silent update that would require authentication against a separate database of authorized users, a database that currently included the entire technical team but could be modified remotely if necessary. This wasn't about sabotage, it was about protection. If Atlantic tried to lock me out when I asserted my ownership rights, I needed to ensure they couldn't simply appropriate my life's work while the legal battle played out. With these preparations in place, I decided to make one final attempt at a reasonable resolution. I scheduled a meeting with Gregory, positioning it as a discussion about the First National Bank implementation's final stages. When I arrived at his office, he was clearly impatient, checking his watch as I sat down. "I have a board call in 15 minutes, so let's make this quick," he said. "This won't take long," I assured him. I wanted to discuss my role in the company moving forward. His expression shifted, slightly surprised, perhaps, that I might suspect what was coming. "Your role? What about it?" "I know about the transition plan, Gregory. The email was accidentally forwarded to me." He didn't bother denying it. These organizational changes happen in any growing company. It's nothing personal. It feels personal when I'm being replaced by someone with no technical qualifications to lead a team developing technology that I created, I countered, keeping my voice measured. "That's business," he said dismissively. "Warren brings a strategic perspective that aligns better with our executive vision." I took a deep breath. "Before you finalize that decision, there's something you should know. I've had the IP agreements reviewed by outside counsel, and it appears that the core intellectual property behind the scheduler legally belongs to me, not Atlantic Financial." For the first time since I'd known him, Gregory appeared genuinely caught off guard. He stared at me for several seconds before responding. "That's absurd. You developed it while employed at FinSync." "I developed it outside normal business hours, as a complete redesign, rather than an improvement to existing systems," I explained. The FinSync IP agreement specifically exempted such independent technical innovations, and I never signed the Atlantic Financial IP agreement after the acquisition. His face flushed. "This is a transparent attempt to extract more money from the company." "No," I corrected him. "This is me, ensuring I'm fairly compensated for technology that's now central to a multi-billion-dollar operation. Technology that you and Warren have consistently devalued, along with my contributions." Gregory's composure cracked. "Do you have any idea who you're threatening? Atlantic Financial has a legal department larger than most law firms. If you pursue this, you'll never work in finance technology again." "I'm not threatening anyone," I said calmly. "I'm stating facts about intellectual property ownership. I'd prefer to reach a reasonable licensing agreement rather than disrupt operations. But that's your choice." He stood abruptly. "This meeting is over. Expect to hear from legal by the end of the day." As I walked back to my desk, a notification lit up my phone. It was a text message from Gregory. "Lose the attitude or lose your $500,000 bonus. Final warning." I considered my response carefully, knowing that whatever I wrote might later become evidence. After a moment, I typed a single-word reply: "Copy." That afternoon, I received an email from Atlantic Financial's legal department requesting an urgent discussion regarding intellectual property matters. I forwarded it to Natalie without responding directly. Meanwhile, I noticed Warren hovering near my team more than usual, asking detailed questions about scheduler administration. My suspicions were confirmed when Marcus messaged me privately. "They're trying to get admin access to the scheduler dashboard. Asked me for configuration details. Said you authorized it." I told him to stall by providing vague, unhelpful information. "If they need specific access, they can ask me directly," I added. By the end of the day, the atmosphere had become unmistakably hostile. Security guards appeared on our floor, an unusual sight. My system access for several peripheral systems was revoked, though crucially, they hadn't figured out how to remove my access to the scheduler itself. As I was preparing to leave, Gregory appeared at my desk, flanked by a woman I recognized as part of the legal team. "Tessa, this is Amanda Wells from legal. We need you to sign some clarifying documents regarding company intellectual property." I glanced at the papers he held, standard IP releases, backdated to the acquisition date. "I'll have my attorney review these and get back to you," I said, making no move to take the documents. "This isn't a negotiation," Gregory said, his voice hard. "Sign them now, or your employment is terminated immediately." I stood and collected my personal items from my desk. "Then I guess I'm terminated." Amanda looked uncomfortable. "Miss Morgan, please understand the seriousness of the situation. The company is prepared to pursue all available legal remedies if you persist with these ownership claims. I understand completely, I replied, and I'm prepared to defend my rights to what I created. My attorney will contact your department tomorrow. As security escorted me from the building, I received another text from Gregory. You've just made the biggest mistake of your career. All access will be revoked by morning. Little did he know that his threat would prove prophetic, but not in the way he imagined. By 8 a.m. the following day, Atlantic Financial would discover exactly what happens when you underestimate both a programmer and the value of what she built. I barely slept that night. Being escorted out of a building where I had poured 6 years of my life was more emotionally devastating than I had anticipated. I cycled through anger, doubt, fear, and back to resolute determination as the hours passed. At 6 a.m., I received a call from Alexa. Tessa, what's happening? Security is collecting badges from everyone on our team, and they're telling us you've been terminated for intellectual property theft. My heart sank at how quickly they were moving to control the narrative. That's not true, Alexa. I created the scheduler, and legally I own the core IP. They're trying to push me out without proper compensation for my work. Things are crazy here, she continued. They've brought in an outside technical team who are trying to access all the scheduler systems. Warren is telling everyone they need to provide their access credentials immediately. This was moving faster than I expected. Alexa, you need to protect yourself. Don't resist anything they're asking, but don't volunteer information either. After we hung up, I called Natalie to update her on the escalating situation. This is actually good for our case, she said. Their aggressive response demonstrates they understand the validity of your claim. Otherwise, they wouldn't be reacting so strongly. At 7:30 a.m., I made the decision I had been contemplating all night. I logged into the scheduler administration dashboard remotely, something I could still do because the authentication system was separated from Atlantic's main corporate systems. I navigated to the user management section and made a critical change. I removed everyone except myself from the authorized users database. I didn't take this step lightly. The scheduler was essential to Atlantic Financial's operations, and disrupting it would affect thousands of transactions. But I configured the lockout to maintain all existing scheduled processes. Only the administration interface would be inaccessible to Atlantic personnel. Transactions would continue processing normally, but they would be unable to make changes or updates without my authorization. This wasn't sabotage. It was a demonstration of ownership and leverage. If Atlantic believed they could simply take what was mine and lock me out with no consequences, they needed a reality check. At exactly 8:01 a.m., my phone exploded with notifications. Text messages, emails, and calls started pouring in from various Atlantic employees, including Gregory, Warren, and even the CTO whom I'd rarely interacted with before. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I watched as my email filled with increasingly panicked messages. 8:02 a.m. Warren. Something's wrong with the scheduler access. Fix it immediately. 8:04 a.m. Gregory. Whatever you've done, undo it now, or face serious legal consequences. 8:07 a.m. CTO. Tessa, we need to discuss the scheduler situation urgently. Please call me directly. I waited until 8:30 a.m. before calling Natalie again. It's done, I told her. They no longer have administrative access to the scheduler. Perfect timing, she replied. I've just finalized our official notice of intellectual property rights and licensing terms. I'm sending it to their legal department in the next hour. The document Natalie had prepared was comprehensive. It asserted my ownership of the core scheduler technology, offered Atlantic Financial a temporary emergency license to continue operations, and proposed a formal licensing agreement moving forward. The terms were significant but fair. A one-time payment of $8 million for the permanent license, plus ongoing royalties based on transaction volume. That's a lot of money, I said, suddenly nervous about the figure. It's actually conservative, Natalie countered. Based on industry standards for mission-critical financial technology, and considering how central this system is to their operations, we could justifiably ask for more. but this gives us room to negotiate while still ensuring you're fairly compensated. By 9 a.m., the situation at Atlantic had reached crisis levels. I received a call from Marcus, who was speaking in hushed tones. They've got the executive team, legal and external consultants all in the main conference room, he reported. Nobody can figure out what happened to the scheduler access. Warren is completely melting down, claiming you hacked the system. I didn't hack anything, I replied. I simply asserted control over technology that legally belongs to me. Well, whatever you did, it's chaos here. They're talking about potential losses in the millions if they can't resolve this by market open tomorrow. I felt a pang of guilt about the disruption, but reminded myself that Atlantic could have approached this fairly from the beginning. Instead, they had chosen to threaten and bully me, believing their size and power made them invincible. At 10:30 a.m., I finally received a call from someone with actual authority. Sandra Palmer, Atlantic Financial's chief legal officer. Her tone was markedly different from the threatening language I'd received earlier. Miss Morgan, this is Sandra Palmer. I've received your attorney's communication regarding the scheduler technology. I think it would be beneficial for all parties if we could discuss this matter directly. Would you be available for a meeting this afternoon? I would, I replied, but only with my attorney present. Of course, she agreed readily. We can arrange that. Our primary concern at the moment is ensuring continuity of operations while we work through these intellectual property questions. I understand, I said. That's addressed in the licensing proposal my attorney sent over. The scheduler will continue functioning normally for all existing operations. The only limitation is on administrative changes. There was a brief silence. So you're confirming that you've restricted access to the system? I've secured access to intellectual property that legally belongs to me, I corrected. While we negotiate appropriate licensing terms, another pause. I see. We'll need to address that immediately as part of our discussion. Can you come to our offices at 2 p.m.? I thought about returning to the building I'd been escorted out of just yesterday. I'd prefer a neutral location. My attorney can arrange a conference room at her firm. Sandra agreed, and the meeting was set for 2 p.m. at Natalie's law firm in Midtown. As I prepared for what would surely be an intense negotiation, I received one more text from Gregory. This won't end well for you. Taking a system hostage is criminal behavior. I forwarded the message to Natalie, who responded immediately. Classic intimidation tactics. Don't engage. We have the legal high ground here, and they know it. That's why they've brought in the CLO directly. The next few hours would determine whether my risky strategy would result in fair compensation for my work or in protracted legal battles that could consume years of my life. I felt a mix of anxiety and determination as I prepared to face the company that had so severely undervalued both me and my creation. The conference room at Natalie's law firm projected exactly the impression we wanted: professional, serious, and on equal footing with Atlantic Financial's representatives. Natalie and I arrived 30 minutes early to prepare, reviewing key documents and discussing potential scenarios. Remember, she advised, they'll try to focus on the access restriction as a separate issue from the IP ownership. Don't let them separate those two things. The access control is your leverage precisely because you're the rightful owner. At exactly 2 p.m., Sandra Palmer arrived with two colleagues. Thomas Reed, Atlantic's Chief Technology Officer, and Brian Mills, another senior attorney. Notably absent were Gregory and Warren, a telling omission that suggested the company was taking this situation seriously enough to keep the provocateurs away. After introductions and preliminary courtesies, Sandra opened the discussion. We appreciate you meeting with us promptly, Miss Morgan. Our immediate concern is the restriction of access to critical financial infrastructure, which is causing significant operational challenges. I understand your concern, I replied calmly. As outlined in our proposal, all existing transactions and scheduled operations continue to function normally. The only limitation is on making administrative changes to the system. Thomas, the CTO, leaned forward. That's still problematic. We have the first national bank integration going live next week. Without administrative access, we can't complete the necessary configurations. That integration can proceed as planned, I assured him. I'm not interested in disrupting Atlantic's business operations. I'm interested in fair compensation for technology that I created and legally own. Sandra shifted tactics. Let's address the ownership claim directly then. Our position is that the scheduler was developed during your employment at FinSync using company resources, making it work for hire and company property, Natalie smoothly interjected. We've provided extensive documentation showing that the core architecture and algorithms were developed by Miss Morgan outside normal business hours, falling under the independent innovation carve-out in her FinSync employment agreement. Additionally, Miss Morgan never executed Atlantic's updated IP agreement following the acquisition. She slid copies of the relevant documents across the table, the original FinSync agreement with the carve-out highlighted, my time-stamped development logs showing evening and weekend work, and the unsigned Atlantic IP assignment. Thomas examined the technical documentation with growing concern. These design documents precede the first official project ticket by nearly 2 months, he noted, almost to himself. Sandra remained composed, but I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. Even if we concede potential ambiguity in ownership of the original code, the system has been substantially enhanced over 6 years using company resources. We're not claiming ownership of all enhancements, I clarified. Our licensing proposal specifically acknowledges Atlantic's ownership of derivative improvements made during normal business hours. But the core architecture and algorithms, the aspects that make the scheduler uniquely valuable, originated with me, outside standard work assignments. The meeting continued for nearly 3 hours, moving from contentious debate to increasingly practical discussion. As the conversation progressed, I began to realize something unexpected. Thomas, the CTO, was becoming an ally. As a technical executive, he seemed to genuinely understand the value of what I had created in a way that Gregory never had. If I'm understanding correctly, Thomas said during a discussion of the scheduler's unique capabilities, you essentially invented a new approach to dependency resolution that doesn't exist in any commercial system. That's correct, I confirmed. The traditional approaches all had fundamental limitations when dealing with high-frequency financial transactions. I had to develop new algorithms from first principles. He nodded thoughtfully. And that's why we haven't been able to find any commercial replacement despite extensive market research. He turned to Sandra. She's right about the value proposition. We estimated replacement costs last year during the strategic review even without considering operational disruption. Just the development cost for a comparable system was estimated at $12 to $15 million, with a timeline of 18 to 24 months. Sandra's expression remained neutral, but I could sense a shift in the dynamic. She conferred privately with Brian for several minutes before addressing us again. We'd like to propose a brief adjournment. Our team needs to consult with executive leadership regarding next steps. Could we reconvene tomorrow morning? Natalie checked with me before responding. That's acceptable, provided the status quo remains in place. The scheduler continues operating normally for existing processes, while administrative access remains restricted pending resolution. They agreed, and the meeting adjourned. As they gathered their materials, Thomas approached me separately. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I wish I'd known about this situation earlier. The technical leadership transition wasn't handled well. I appreciated his candor. Thank you for saying that. After they left, Natalie was cautiously optimistic. The CTO's validation of your technical contribution is extremely helpful. And the fact that they didn't continue pushing the criminal angle suggests they're taking our legal position seriously. That evening, I received a surprising call from Marcus. You would not believe what happened after your meeting, he said, excitement evident in his voice. Tell me, there was a huge blowout between Gregory and the executive team. I overheard parts of it because it happened right outside our department. The CEO was furious, demanding to know why Gregory had allowed the situation to deteriorate to this point. What did Gregory say? I asked. He tried to frame it as you being disgruntled and taking revenge. But then the bombshell dropped. Someone from legal revealed they'd discovered that Gregory knew about the IP agreement issue months ago. Apparently, HR had flagged that you never signed the new agreement, and Gregory buried it, assuming it wouldn't matter. I was stunned. He knew? Yeah, and it gets worse for him. Warren apparently panicked and admitted that Gregory had specifically instructed him to secure control of the scheduler and push you out before the first national deal closed. Said it was part of Gregory's plan to claim full credit for the successful integration with the bank. The pieces suddenly fell into place. Why Gregory had been so determined to undermine me. Why Warren had been asking so many questions about scheduler administration. They hadn't just been planning to fire me. They had been systematically positioning to erase my contribution entirely once I was gone. There's more, Marcus continued. Do you know about Project Quantum? No, what's that? It's a major initiative Atlantic is planning to announce next quarter, a new high-frequency trading platform for institutional clients. The entire thing is built around the scheduler's capabilities. The revenue projections are in the hundreds of millions. This was information I hadn't been privy to, a massive business initiative entirely dependent on my technology, planned without my knowledge or proper compensation. How do you know this? I asked. Warren's laptop was left open when he was called into the emergency executive meeting. Alexa saw the presentation deck. The scheduler is mentioned 67 times as the proprietary core technology enabling the entire platform. This revelation changed everything. The scheduler wasn't just valuable for Atlantic's current operations, it was the foundation of their entire growth strategy for the coming years. My leverage was even greater than I had realized. I thanked Marcus for the information and immediately called Natalie to update her. She listened intently, taking notes. This is extremely valuable intelligence, she said when I finished. It completely changes our negotiating position for tomorrow. The licensing terms we proposed, which seemed aggressive yesterday, may actually be too conservative given this new context. The next morning, I felt a strange calm as we prepared to reconvene. The anxiety of the previous days had been replaced by certainty. I now understood the true value of what I had created, not just to me, but to a multi-billion-dollar financial institution that had built its future around it. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I would never again allow my work to be devalued or my contribution to be erased. The scheduler was my life's work, and after today, everyone would understand exactly what that meant. When we arrived for the second meeting, the composition of Atlantic's team had changed significantly. Sandra Palmer was still present, but Thomas Reed had been joined by Elizabeth Grant, Atlantic Financial's CEO, a clear indication that this matter had reached the highest levels of the company. Completing their team was David Foster, their Chief Financial Officer. The atmosphere was markedly different from the previous day. Gone was the adversarial tension, replaced by a business-like focus that suggested they were now approaching this as a transaction rather than a conflict. Elizabeth opened the meeting with unexpected directness. Miss Morgan, I want to personally apologize for the situation that has developed. After reviewing the facts, it's clear that there were significant failures in how your contributions were recognized and managed following the acquisition. Her apology seemed sincere, but I maintained a neutral expression, letting Natalie take the lead in our response. We appreciate that acknowledgement, Natalie said. As we've established, Tessa created valuable intellectual property that forms the core of critical Atlantic financial systems. We're here to establish fair compensation for that contribution. Elizabeth nodded. We agree that compensation is appropriate. However, before we discuss specific terms, we need to address the access restriction to the scheduler administration interface. The restricted access remains in place to protect Miss Morgan's intellectual property during negotiations, Natalie replied smoothly. As we've confirmed, all ongoing operations continue to function normally, Thomas interjected. That's technically true, but we have the First National Bank integration next week, which requires administrative access. Any delay would have significant financial and reputational consequences. I decided to speak directly to this point. I'm willing to personally oversee the necessary configurations for the first national integration, working alongside your team. That would allow the project to proceed on schedule while we finalize our agreement. Elizabeth considered this. That's a reasonable interim solution. Now, regarding the broader agreement, we've reviewed your proposed licensing terms. David, the CFO, distributed folders containing Atlantic's counterproposal. We're prepared to acknowledge Ms. Morgan's contribution to the core scheduler technology through a one-time innovation recognition payment of $2 million, subject to standard confidentiality and non-disparagement clauses. Natalie and I reviewed the document briefly before she responded. This offer significantly undervalues the technology. As you're now aware, the scheduler isn't just supporting current operations, it's the foundation of your Project Quantum initiative, projected to generate hundreds of millions in revenue. The surprise on their faces confirmed that they hadn't expected us to know about Project Quantum. Sandra and Elizabeth exchanged glances, while David visibly tensed. "How did you come to know about that project?" Sandra asked carefully. "That's not relevant to our discussion," Natalie deflected. "What is relevant is that our client's technology is substantially more valuable to Atlantic Financial than your offer suggests." Elizabeth recovered quickly. Project Quantum is still in development with uncertain market adoption. It would be premature to base compensation on projected future revenues that may never materialize. Yet Atlantic is comfortable building an entire strategic initiative around this technology, I pointed out. That demonstrates extraordinary confidence in its capabilities and value. The negotiation continued with proposals and counterproposals. Atlantic gradually increased their offer to $4 million, then $6 million, while we reduced our demand from the original $8 million plus royalties to a single payment of $12 million. During a break where both teams conferred separately, Natalie whispered, "They're moving faster than I expected. They must be under tremendous pressure to resolve this quickly." When we reconvened, Elizabeth made what she characterized as their final offer, $8 million as a complete settlement, with no ongoing royalties. "This represents the absolute limit of what we can justify to our board," she stated firmly. "It's a fair recognition of the innovation while allowing Atlantic to move forward with clear ownership of the technology." Natalie and I conferred briefly before she responded. "We're prepared to accept the $8 million figure, but with 3 additional conditions." "Which are?" Sandra asked. "First, public recognition of Tessa as the primary creator of the scheduler technology, including appropriate credit in any patents or publications. Second, a consulting agreement allowing Tessa to provide transition support at a rate of $1,000 per hour for up to 6 months. And third, a formal review of how intellectual property and employee contributions are managed at Atlantic to prevent similar situations in the future. The first 2 conditions were primarily for my benefit, ensuring my work would be properly credited and providing additional compensation through the consulting arrangement. But the third was something I felt strongly about. What had happened to me shouldn't happen to others. Elizabeth considered these terms thoughtfully before nodding. "Those are reasonable additions. We can agree to them in principle, subject to working out the specific language." With that, we had the framework of an agreement. The legal teams would need several days to draft the formal documents, but the core terms were settled. I would receive $8 million for my creation, along with professional recognition and a lucrative consulting arrangement. As the meeting concluded, Thomas approached me separately again. "Once this is finalized, I'd like to discuss the possibility of you leading Project Quantum from a technical perspective, not as an employee, but as a senior consultant. The project needs someone who truly understands the scheduler's capabilities." I was surprised by the offer. "What about Warren and Gregory?" Thomas's expression darkened. "Warren has been reassigned to an administrative role. As for Gregory, his employment with Atlantic concluded this morning." The news that Gregory had been fired gave me a complicated mix of satisfaction and vindication. His attempt to erase me had ultimately led to his own removal. As we left the meeting, Natalie couldn't contain her excitement. $8 million, Tessa, plus potentially hundreds of thousands in consulting fees. This is an exceptional outcome. I felt strangely calm. The money was significant, life-changing even. But what meant more was the acknowledgement, the recognition that what I had built mattered, that my contribution had value that couldn't be easily dismissed or replaced. Over the next week, as the legal documents were finalized, I worked closely with Atlantic's technical team to prepare for the first national bank integration. The process was remarkably smooth now that the power dynamics had shifted. The same people who had previously dismissed my input now sought my expertise eagerly. The day before the integration was set to go live, I received an unexpected visitor at the temporary office Atlantic had provided me. It was Elizabeth Grant. I wanted to check in personally on the integration progress, she explained. We're on track, I assured her. The configuration changes are complete and tested. First, National should transition smoothly onto the platform tomorrow. Elizabeth nodded, then hesitated before continuing. I also wanted to have a more candid conversation about what happened. The situation with Gregory and Warren, it represents a failure of leadership that I take responsibility for. I should have been more directly engaged with how our technical teams were being managed post-acquisition. Her candor surprised me. I appreciate you saying that. We're implementing the review of intellectual property management that was part of our agreement, she continued. But beyond that, I'm reassessing how we integrate acquired companies and their talent. The scheduler is clearly exceptional technology, and we nearly lost it and you through mismanagement. It was a level of reflection I hadn't expected from a CEO of her stature. That's good to hear. The scheduler is special to me, but it's also just code. The people who create that code, their knowledge and passion, that's what really drives innovation. Elizabeth smiled. That perspective is exactly why I hope you'll consider a long-term consulting relationship with Atlantic beyond the 6 months in our agreement. We need that kind of thinking. As she left, I reflected on how dramatically my circumstances had changed in just 2 weeks. From being escorted out of the building to negotiating as an equal with the CEO, all because I had finally stood up for the true value of my work. The next day, the first national bank integration went live flawlessly. As transaction data began flowing through the scheduler, I felt a familiar pride in watching the system I'd created perform exactly as designed, orchestrating thousands of complex financial operations with elegant precision. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was Natalie calling with news. The funds have been transferred, she announced. $8 million minus our firm's fee is now in your account. Congratulations, Tessa. You're officially a multimillionaire. I thanked her, still processing the reality of what had happened. When I checked my bank account and saw the new balance, $7.4 million after legal fees, the number seemed almost abstract, disconnected from reality. That evening, I met with my former team, Darren, Alexa, Marcus, and Harper, at our favorite restaurant. They had all been offered improved positions following the reorganization that resulted from my standoff with the company. To Tessa, Marcus toasted, raising his glass, who taught us all that sometimes you have to fight for what you're worth. As we celebrated, I reflected on everything that had transpired. The fear and anxiety of those uncertain days had been replaced by something I hadn't expected, a profound sense of liberation. Not just financial freedom, though that was certainly part of it, but the liberation that comes from standing up for yourself and being acknowledged. The scheduler had begun as a technical solution to a complex problem. It had become something far more a testament to the value of innovation, the importance of proper recognition, and ultimately, the power of refusing to be underestimated. 6 months after the settlement, my life had transformed in ways I never imagined. The consulting agreement with Atlantic Financial had extended beyond the original term, with the company eager to retain my expertise for Project Quantum. My hourly rate had increased to $1,200, a figure that still sometimes made me laugh in disbelief when I thought about it. But the most significant change wasn't financial. With my newfound security and confidence, I had established Morgan Innovation Labs, a small consulting firm specializing in financial technology. We focused on helping smaller financial institutions implement advanced scheduling and transaction processing systems, bringing enterprise-level capabilities to companies that couldn't afford the massive infrastructure of places like Atlantic. I had hired Alexa and Marcus from my former team, both of whom had been excited to join a venture where their contributions would be properly valued. We operated from a modern office space in a converted industrial building, with large windows overlooking the city skyline, a far cry from the sterile corporate environment we'd left behind. On this particular morning, I was preparing for a meeting that symbolized just how far things had come. Atlantic Financial was considering a strategic investment in Morgan Innovation Labs, wanting privileged access to our next generation of financial scheduling technology. Thomas Reed, still CTO at Atlantic, had championed the potential partnership, recognizing that our nimble team was innovating faster than their larger organization could match. It was validation of the approach. I had always believed in thoughtful, focused innovation over corporate bureaucracy. As I reviewed the presentation materials for the meeting, my phone rang. It was Natalie, who had become both my attorney and my friend. "Are you ready for today?" she asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied. "Though it still feels surreal to be negotiating with Atlantic as equals." "Not equals," she corrected. "They need you more than you need them now." That's a powerful position. She wasn't wrong. In the months since our settlement, Atlantic's Project Quantum had gained significant attention in the financial industry. The scheduler technology now properly credited to me in their marketing materials was repeatedly cited as their key competitive advantage. My consulting role had given me insight into just how dependent they remained on my expertise. "By the way," Natalie continued, "I heard through the grapevine that Warren finally left Atlantic. Apparently, his strategic innovation position was eliminated in the latest reorganization." I felt no satisfaction at this news, only a sense that appropriate consequences had finally materialized. That's not surprising. Innovation requires actually creating something valuable. After finishing the call, I gathered my materials and headed to the conference room where my team was assembling. Alexa was setting up the presentation while Marcus organized the technical demonstration we had prepared. "Nervous?" Alexa asked as I joined them. "Oddly, no," I realized. 6 months ago, I was fighting for recognition. Today, we're deciding whether their investment makes sense for our goals. That's a fundamental shift. At 10 a.m., the Atlantic team arrived. Thomas led the group, which included their head of strategic investments and 2 technical directors. Notably absent was Elizabeth Grant, a sign that while this partnership was important, it wasn't critical enough to warrant the CEO's direct involvement. That, too, was a shift in dynamic. "Tessa, great to see you." Thomas greeted me warmly. "We're excited about the possibilities here." The meeting proceeded smoothly as we presented our vision for the next generation of financial scheduling technology. Rather than simply enhancing the original scheduler architecture, we were developing an entirely new approach that incorporated machine learning to predict and prevent bottlenecks before they occurred. "The potential efficiency gains are extraordinary," Thomas commented during the technical demonstration. "How far along is the implementation?" "We have a working prototype processing simulated data," Marcus explained. "We're targeting a production-ready system within 4 months." The Atlantic team exchanged impressed glances. Their own development cycles typically ran 18 months or longer. After the presentation, we moved to discussing potential investment terms. Atlantic was offering $15 million for a 20% stake in Morgan Innovation Labs, plus a preferred licensing arrangement for our technology. "The valuation is competitive," their investment director noted, "significantly above market for a company at your stage." I nodded acknowledgement but didn't rush to accept. The terms need to preserve our independence and direction. "We've built something special here precisely because we're not constrained by corporate processes." "We understand that," Thomas assured me. "This would be a minority investment specifically designed to give you the resources to accelerate development while maintaining your autonomy." As the discussion continued, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had led to this moment. Just over 6 months ago, I had been escorted from Atlantic's building, threatened with legal action and uncertain about my future. Now I was negotiating from a position of strength, with options and possibilities that extended far beyond what I could have imagined. After the Atlantic team departed with an agreement to continue discussions and potentially finalize terms within the month, I called an impromptu celebration with my team. Whether or not we accept their investment, I told Alexa and Marcus, as we shared a bottle of champagne in our office, today represents something important. We've proven that genuine innovation, properly valued and directed, can thrive outside the constraints of traditional corporate structures, and that standing up for yourself pays off, Alexa added, raising her glass. Later that evening, as I was preparing to leave the office, I received an unexpected email. The sender was Warren Phillips, my former antagonist at Atlantic. The subject line read simply, "Congratulations." Curious, I opened it. "Tessa, I've followed the news about your success with Morgan Innovation Labs. What you've accomplished is impressive. I owe you an apology for my role in what happened at Atlantic. I was wrong to undermine you and claim credit for your work. The scheduler was always your creation, and I failed to recognize both its value and your contribution. Gregory's approach was fundamentally flawed, and I should have had the integrity to see that. I've learned difficult but necessary lessons from this experience. Wishing you continued success, Warren." The email left me with mixed emotions. Part of me was suspicious of his motives, wondering if this was a strategic gesture now that my star was rising, but another part recognized what it took to acknowledge such mistakes directly. I decided to respond simply, "Warren, thank you for your message. Recognition of others' contributions is the foundation of true innovation. I wish you well in your future endeavors." Tessa, as I sent the email and shut down my computer for the day, I felt a sense of closure. The conflict that had defined so much of the past year was truly behind me now. What remained was the opportunity to build something meaningful on my own terms. The following week, after careful consideration and negotiation of improved terms, we accepted Atlantic's investment $15 million for 15% of Morgan Innovation Labs, with explicit protections for our autonomy and development direction. The infusion of capital would allow us to expand our team and accelerate our development timeline significantly. At the signing ceremony, Thomas pulled me aside for a private conversation. "You know, when you first locked us out of the scheduler, it created the biggest crisis I've experienced in my 20 years at Atlantic," he confided. "But looking back, it was exactly what the company needed, a wake-up call about how we value innovation and the people who create it. Sometimes disruption is necessary for growth," I replied with a smile. "Indeed. And speaking of growth, Elizabeth asked me to float an idea by you. Would you consider joining Atlantic's board of directors? She believes your perspective would be valuable as we continue to evolve our approach to technology development." The offer took me by surprise. From fired employee to board member in less than a year. That would be quite a journey. It would send a powerful message throughout the organization about the value we place on technical innovation and the people behind it, Thomas noted. I promised to consider the offer, though my focus remained primarily on building Morgan Innovation Labs into the company. I envisioned one where brilliant technical minds could thrive and receive proper recognition for their contributions. 1 year to the day after I had received that fateful text message threatening my bonus, I stood on a small stage at our company's first anniversary celebration. We had grown to a team of 22, with our next-generation scheduling technology now in production at 3 mid-sized financial institutions and a growing waitlist of interested clients. When I founded this company, I told the assembled team, it was born from the belief that technical innovation deserves proper recognition and reward. But what I've learned this year is that the true value isn't just in the code we write or the systems we build, it's in creating an environment where exceptional people can do their best work. I raised my glass to the team that had helped transform my moment of crisis into a triumph beyond what I could have imagined. To Morgan Innovation Labs, I toasted. where we'll never forget that our greatest asset is each other. The applause and cheers that followed filled me with profound gratitude. The journey from that threatening text message to this moment had been extraordinary, from fighting for recognition to leading a thriving company, from being undervalued to setting the terms of my own success. The scheduler that had started it all was now just one chapter in an ongoing story of innovation and growth. But the lesson it had taught me would remain at the heart of everything I built moving forward. Never underestimate your worth. Never surrender what you've rightfully created, and never let others define the value of your contribution. Have you ever had to stand up for the value of your work or contributions? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this journey resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories, and share it with someone who might need a reminder of their own worth. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, sometimes the path to success requires having the courage to say no before you can say yes to the right opportunity.